Hello. Um, so a few weeks ago, Avril and I were encouraged by various people to do a joint video where we talked about politics and cults because I'm quite good at talking about fake news and Avril is quite good about talking about unfake news or real news, or as we like to call it, news. And that video went down quite well. It didn't have a lot of views, but the people who viewed it said we should do this. And one of Avril's friends, a film director by the name of James Merendino, suggested that maybe we should make a regular thing of this. We said, no. And then he said, no, really, you should. And so here we are. And we have decided to call it Cope. Because we are here to help you cope with some of the madness that is going on in the political and social realm in the 2020s.
Contemplate the strange.
I'm Howard. I write books about films and movies and things. And this is Avril.
Yeah, I don't do any of that. In fact, I don't even know what I'm doing here. But I'm blaming James for all of it. Just
It's
so you know,
completely your fault, James.
It's James. It's your fault. But I come from a political family, and I didn't go into the family business, much to the disappointment of said political family.
The family business being political analysis.
Yes. Well, or actual politics, but I don't have the personality for it. But I am very good at political analysis, and even though I didn't go into it for a living, during the course of the past 4 years, I've been called upon more and more to explain both politics and political procedures. Constitutional procedures, political procedures, election procedures, particularly to my friends overseas, who just aren't familiar with how we do things because they're really opaque and make very little sense for anybody who didn't grow up with them.
You're not wrong.
It's true. But as it turns out, I seem to have a minor superpower in that I can, and did, with a degree of accuracy that is apparently a little spooky to some people, call every step of this election cycle.
I think you need to own the spooky. Everything you do is spooky. So let's do this.
Don't ever change.
Don't change. No.
But in any case, we're going to attempt to do this once a week and see how we go. Especially during this really weird interstitial time between the election and what happens on January 20th, whatever that's going to be, although, spoiler alert, Joe Biden's going to be sworn in, despite whatever Donald Trump might think. So the difference is that I don't know, I can't cogently talk about fake news because I find that it's incredibly angry making. Like, I get really, 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 really angry when reality gets worked like that. So Howard's great at that. So this is our first bit. And so today, the first thing that we're going to talk about, we had a question from the last video. We had a question about how propaganda and how the kinds of methods that are used on the right, how do they translate when they go to the other side? Like, how do they translate when they go to the left? And as it turned out, the universe, you ask and you shall receive, because the universe provided us with exactly that in the past few days, where there was this widely shared thread that I must have seen on Twitter at least a dozen times, like all over the place, about the origins of I told you, I'm not going to, they're now calling it Parler, Howard, they're calling it Parler. I can't.
For the sake of historical things, for people watching this in a year's time who might stumble upon this on YouTube, what is Parler or Parler?
It is basically like Twitter, except for conservatives. And it is set itself up to be the alternative to Twitter because Twitter hurts conservative feelings, basically.
Oh, God.
And when it had started a few months back, and, with everybody saying that all these conservatives saying that they were going to pick up their ball off of Twitter and go to this new thing, which is, at the time, was being called Parler, or I would say Parler. And now, because for some reason conservatives really, really like to butcher other languages, it's now being called Parler, which infuriates me. But there was this thread that went around about who was funding it, because there has to be like massive amounts of funding in order for this to be a thing, because for it to scale. Otherwise, you're screwed. And it was talking about the fact that ideologically it was probably difficult to get people to work on it who were also in that field of tech. Like, that's generally a fairly liberal place.
Is
that
it
field?
though?
I don't know. What are you asking me for?
No, the tech is largely controlled by libertarians at the moment. Tech is full of libertarians. We can go into that in a minute. But yes, so here's this thread that's gone on Twitter, which is talking about the origins of the new social medium that we shall call Fashbook, or OnlyFash, or Mindspace. You just come up with fantastic alternative names for it as a parlor game.
It's terrible.
I know, right? They're not going to get better, viewers. So there's this thread that goes around, and the thread starts from a fairly straightforward premise: is that Parler's pretty astroturfed, isn't it? But then what happens?
So the whole thread, and I can't even dunk on the guy who wrote it because I don't remember what his name was, but it reminded me, it went on forever. It was like 15, 16, 20 different tweets in a row. And it really reminded me in the end, when I showed it to you, of how animation gets made. So for those who don't know me, I'm a huge cartoon, I'm like a crazy person. So you've got keyframes and you have in-betweens. And all the keyframes were pretty valid. Like the initial premise, which was who is funding this new platform? Like who? That's a totally legit question. Great to ask. Let's go. And in the middle, they came with some actual data and showed how this is not organic. Like this is sort of like astroturfed, and they're showing the distribution and how things are disseminating on the internet, and showing like where it's all coming from, right? And it clearly is an organized push to push conservatives towards this platform. And I'm like, okay, I'm with you there. But all the in-between frames and then the end was kind of back to the beginning of who really is funding this? Like, who is the sort of shadowy masters behind Parler? And I was just like, okay, I'm with you. And then all the in-betweens were crazy pants. Like, they were really, really crazy pants. And it was exactly the same methodology that we talked about last week, where it was, here's a hinky thing, here's a hinky thing, here's a hinky thing. Somebody has to do the research on this so that everybody just fills in the blanks with whatever the hell they want. And it got crazy. Like, it was blaming it all on Russia. Apparently, this was now a Russian operative thing. And I'm staring at this thing, and when I showed it to you, I was like, this is some bullshit.
Yeah.
There's no way that any of this will turn out to be accurate. And lo and behold, of course it's not. It's actually worse. It is actually worse. Because the actual people that funded Parler are the Mercers, who were behind Cambridge Analytica, which is actually worse.
Yeah, an organization that ruins 2 countries,
Yeah.
at least.
But back to, so now we know that what happened, but the question was about how propaganda and how that kind of conspiracy theory, those conspiracy theory fundamentals, how they work when applied to the left as opposed to the right.
Yes, and I mean they work in much the same way, don't they? And I mean, and they're kind of harmful in that you come to conclusions that are crazy pants and conclusions that actually hide what might actually be a worse truth. So you have these like wild conspiracy theories about, the communists. It's like, when it got to communists, I'm like, are they aware of how much traction communists currently have in the Russian Federation right now? Are they aware of how much time Vladimir Putin has for communists? Really? It's like that was an issue maybe 40 years ago, just about. But maybe you had a reason to be scared of communists 40 years ago because there's international espionage and all sorts of things. But communists?
It really was kind of nuts, and again, it followed, and I because I learned this from you, it absolutely followed that same exact pattern that it does on the right, where with here's a valid question, and a hinky thing, and a hinky thing, and a hinky thing, and they may or may not have any connection, but you're being asked to make the connections for them, like you're supposed to fill it all in with whatever it is that you've got.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the IKEA narrative.
Yes.
Which is going to be my trademark now. The IKEA narrative, the idea that you've got a narrative, it's in a flat pack, you have to build your narrative yourself, right? But the narrative only goes together one way. And there are instructions, and the instructions have like, an amusing cartoon of a guy looking confused. But they are there showing you how to put it together and giving you the illusion that you put it together yourself. Because, with an IKEA flatback table, you have put it together yourself, but really, how much have you actually done? You've literally just put the screws in. And
the weird part was that I don't even follow that many people on Twitter. Like, this is my 9th Twitter account, for real. And I only follow like 130 people. Like, it's not like I follow that many people. I saw this thread disseminated over and over and over with people that are otherwise completely intelligent going, yes, we really need to look into this. And I'm going, no, we do not. We do not need to look into this because this is nonsense. How are you even falling for this? And so the conclusion clearly is that it's not limited to an ideology. It's a process. It's a process by which people are pushed into a direction that they were already heading. It's confirming their confirmation bias and then pushing them forward.
And radicalizing them. And it's dangerous in that sense because of the radicalization inherent in that. And it radicalizes people to sort of believe bonkers things.
This was pretty bonkers. And again,
things.
The reality is actually worse. The Mercers are actually worse. Yeah, and the thing was that it also didn't make sense timing-wise. Like, this push to push all these conservatives off of Twitter and onto their own platform didn't actually, I mean, it started a few months ago, but it was largely quiet until about until the election. So it all happened after the election, not before it. Before it would have probably been more useful. But it didn't happen until afterwards. And then there was that huge push. So it was like, why would the Russians give a shit? And so all of this sounded crazy to me. And so in the end, it turns out, no, it's just the Mercers and they're just horrible. So, and it's like Cambridge Analytica Mark II, because what they're doing is giant amounts of data harvesting. I mean, that's exactly their point. They are taking all of these people on their platform and harvesting their data for whatever purposes they've got.
Money.
Well, yeah, but whatever the grift is later down the line.
Yeah, but the grift is money. The money is there, and it's like the thing is that it's utterly amoral money. They're going whaling, okay. And I feel a couple of years ago there was a maker of mobile phone games who notoriously appeared at an industry event, an industry convention, and he gave a presentation which he entitled "Let's Go Whaling," which you can find on YouTube, and is essentially, it presents the ways in which mobile phone games monetize their stuff to take advantage of the whales, the people who have gambling addictions and payment addictions and things, and how to make a game to exploit someone who is vulnerable to spending money. And the thing is, many of those techniques are, when slightly tweaked, the same techniques that are used by things like QAnon, by the bonkers conspiracy theories, and by Cambridge Analytica to pull people in, to make people invest. And people invest their money, people invest their time, people invest their ideologies, and people invest their fucking souls, right? So Cambridge Analytica are whalers, and Parler, Fashbook, OnlyFash, Mindspace, is there. It's there in order to it is legitimately a place where assholes can talk freely, except not as freely as Twitter in some ways. They've apparently got rules about how to communicate, but they've also got stricter rules about how to make a password. So there's wonderful screenshots of all these people who are really, really incensed because they've got to put an @ symbol or a tilde in their password. But they are also using this as a way of making a grift happen.
Sure.
And making money out of it, amorally.
But
because they don't actually care about the morals of it. It's just the money.
They've never cared about the morals of anything. But the next, so the question, that we were asked about how these kind of conspiracy theories work on the left, it's apparently exactly the same as they work in any other direction. Like,
it is. And incidentally, the grift also works in every direction. The reason that the grift is pushing people to the right is because there's money on the right.
Right.
And as long as they continue pushing people to the right, there's more money on the right, so they could push farther right.
That's really funny that you mentioned that, because I have I donated to a bunch of down ticket races in this past election, and there is some left side grift going on, because since then, because now we have the runoffs in Georgia, there has been crazy amounts of grift mail coming in trying to get you to donate to these bogus PACs and super PACs and whatever, trying to help the Georgia Senate race. Like, I have a stack of email like this of essentially fake supportive, fake campaign supporters wanting money to help the Georgia Senate races, the runoffs. And I'm like, I'm not falling for this, but they have got to be making money like they were printing it, because this is such a big deal.
And there is progressive grift. You see, people don't. This is awful, because one of the worst things on the right is the assumption that people are only progressive and fighting for people's rights because they want to get something out of it. That they don't actually think that it's okay, that it's good to support other people. And this is partly because they know that they would do it given the chance. And people do it. That's the worst thing. People do make hay from progressive politics. They realize that there's a market there and they exploit it. They go whaling. And they go whaling on both sides. there are people who are exploiting all of us, even people who are fundamentally trying to be good.
I should mention that because I've actually had this question asked of me like 3 or 4 times this week, where do I donate? Where should I go if I want to donate to the Georgia Senate races? Guys, the answer is Fair Fight. It's Stacey Abrams' organization, and they will automatically divide your donation in half between the 2 different Senate races in Georgia, but it's Fair Fight. And I wouldn't donate to anybody else because at least we know that Stacey Abrams can be trusted with the money. But I've actually had a bunch of people come to me this week and ask me like where to donate. And so if you're one of those people who's looking to donate to the Georgia Senate runoffs, the answer is Fair Fight. And make sure that you're giving it to Stacey Abrams' organization because they can be trusted with your money.
One of the things that's been particularly interesting in the last couple of weeks is that I think as of today, Trump is down 25-1 on lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
He's won 1 partially and lost 25.
Mm-hmm.
And even he's reached the point now where even the lawsuits that are remaining, even if they are all won, will not change the results of the election. Pretty much. Now, why bother? Why keep going? Why keep stonewalling? What is the point? Why reach the point where it's now embarrassing? It's been 100 years or more, 127 years since a presidential candidate who lost hasn't conceded.
So there's a few different things going on here. First of all, he's fundraising off of this ridiculous nonsense.
He is.
And I've explained that before, that he's raising money to not only just to get rid of his campaign debt, but he has already made a new political action committee, a new PAC, that is ostensibly for the idea that he's going to run again in 2024. Pro tip, doubt it. But he doesn't have to give back the money. So when people are sending him money right now, the fundraising he's doing on the endless fight to overturn whatever the hell it is that he thinks he's going to do, which, by the way, he already knows he's not going to do, it's just a revenue stream at this point. It's just a revenue stream. The arguments in court have gotten so bad that, first of all, a whole bunch of his lawyers have quit. Like a whole bunch of these attorneys have quit because they are risking their professional reputations. And the problem is that when you go into court, like actual judges need actual evidence. And when you don't provide it, they get very angry. So, because you're just wasting their time.
Right.
So now you've got like Rudy Giuliani, who probably shouldn't be trusted to walk and chew gum at the same time at this point. But the point is that he's making a lot of money off of this. But the other part of this, honestly, is that he has to keep that 28% of the people that will follow him over the cliff. He has to keep them engaged and in his pocket for whatever the next grift is down the line. Like if he attempts to start a media company, if he wants to start selling commemorative plates or coins or some shit.
Or the 100 million he was offered to write his autobiography.
He already knows that the lawsuits won't work. He's known that the lawsuits wouldn't work. So the second attempt was the faithless electors thing. I've been saying this for weeks. This is such crazy bullshit. And
all right, reiterate
work.
It for the people who didn't see our other video.
A faithless elector is an elector who has been slated to vote for a particular candidate in the electoral process, and then at that time, he decides to go rogue and does whatever he wants. This is not that unusual. I mean, it does happen. It happened in 2016. There were seven.
Yeah.
There were 7, 5 on one, but it happens on both sides. It's usually a protest vote. It happens on both sides, and it doesn't change anything. So it's not going to change anything this time either. The big fight.
Why isn't it going to change anything this time?
Because there are things in 33 states. There are things called faithless elector laws that prevent this from happening. And even if you were to take all of the states that have that he's been contesting, and look at their laws, there's not enough math to overturn anything. What he really is trying to do is not actually overturn it. What he's really trying to do is pull the lead that Joe Biden had in the Electoral College below 270 so that nobody wins. And if nobody wins, then each state gets one vote. And on that basis, he would win because he had more states, even though more people,
Biden's
obviously.
Got more people and more bigger states.
Right.
Because Pennsylvania and California are two of the biggest, aren't they?
Yeah. California has 55 electoral votes and Pennsylvania has 20.
Right.
So what he's trying to do is claw back Joe Biden's lead to below 270 so that each state would get a vote and then he could win that way. But the only way to actually do that would be to essentially steal the electors. There's not enough math really to do this. Like in Wisconsin and Georgia and Pennsylvania, there are no faithless elector laws. There are no faithless elector laws in Georgia and Pennsylvania, but in Wisconsin there are, but there isn't really a penalty for it. Like the vote still counts. It's just that, they make stern faces at you and write you a nasty letter or something. Like, it's not really serious. But we are now at the point where states themselves, like the Georgia Secretary of State is a Republican, and he is thoroughly sick of everyone's shit.
Yeah, and he's at war with
Lindsey Graham
and the Georgia senators as well, who wrote a stern letter calling him to step down, saying it wasn't partisan at all.
So now we have this thing where it's now a matter of state sovereignty, where you're asking states to basically just throw their own constituents under the bus. And in states that were quite close, in states that where you're experiencing recounts or whatever, no one really wants to do this because it's political suicide. It's absolutely political suicide in a state that is close. To say, like, for example, if you lived in a town, if your city, right, voted in a close election for a representative, and then the opposing party kind of just found a way to just throw it out and pick the other person, there would be madness, because it's not like everybody wanted this. It was like a 50-50 split. And, even people who wanted the other person, there's going to be some percentage of them who believe that the basic unfairness and the basic undermining of whatever your electoral process is not worth this.
You're going to have more than half the people pissed off. Yeah.
Meanwhile, these votes, again, a lot of people keep bringing up the 2000 vote, the Bush v. Gore thing. That was a matter of 537 votes in one state.
On the states, yeah.
And yes, we can absolutely argue that, whether or not that election was stolen or not, or he should have kept fighting or not. We can talk about that forever. But the fact of the matter is that there is no state, nowhere, where anything is close to being that slim a margin. We're talking about, anywhere from between 10,000 and 150,000 votes.
What's the closest one?
I think that it's about 7,000. I think it's Arizona.
Right. Okay. And they're not having a recount.
No, they are not having a recount because Arizona law, the only way you get a recount is if you are within 0.1% of or 200 votes, whichever is fewer, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now Trump has finally decided he's going to pony it. He has grifted at least $3 million from his fan club, and they're going to do a recount in Wisconsin. But the
But
differential,
only 2 counties in Wisconsin.
right, a partial recount in Wisconsin, but only
Yeah.
the recount, only the places where
Only the
there's a lot of
Democrat places.
right. So they'll recount in Madison and they'll recount in Milwaukee,
And it won't change a thing.
and won't change anything. But the thing in the play in Michigan, this is interesting. The play in Michigan that has just played out in Wayne County, which is the county that encompasses Greater Detroit. So two of the folks who were there to certify the county's voting refused. The 2 Republicans refused to certify. And they eventually did certify, like they went under incredible pressure and they eventually did certify. And now, like as of a couple of hours ago, they're trying to do like take it back and have like backsies. And not, but what the interesting part of that story is that is that has nothing to do with Democrats. That fight between those 2 GOP certification people and is an internal GOP fight. This is all of them shooting at each other. Because now that the only thing up for grabs are those 2 Senate seats in Georgia, and now that the senators, the GOP senators who have kept their seats, feel comfortable, they are tired of Trump's shit. And they just want to get on with it, and they are not interested in this attempted coup of the election. It's not really a coup, but this attempt at fucking around with the electoral process, because just so we are clear, the presidential ballot and the Senate ballot are the same piece of paper. And if you suddenly start messing around with the top of the ticket, then somebody rather early on, and probably me, is going to say something about the fact that no, that's not how this works. These are all on the same ticket. You can't just throw out the top of the ticket and leave the rest of it alone. Now we get to go do this again for everybody. And nobody who just kept their Senate seat wants this. What they want, especially now because they have now allowed this madness to go on for the past 2.5 weeks, what they want is for Trump to shut up. And so they went and told their own GOP fellows in Wayne County to just certify. And Michigan, the Michigan Secretary of State, has made it perfectly clear that they are going to give all of those electoral votes to Joe Biden. So all of this nonsense is like a circus, and it's just for show, and it doesn't matter. Like that they're just wasting everybody's time and making everyone miserable. But what's interesting is that this is absolutely an internal GOP fight. Democrats have nothing to do with this. We're all just sitting there like. So that's kind of the reason why ultimately that he keeps going is he has to. Well, there's a couple of reasons.
Trump keeps going.
That Trump keeps going.
Yep.
Well, the other reason is simply that he cannot stop. This is like a compulsive behavior. He, like, aside from the grift and aside from the fact that he's raising money on this and to push him into his next thing or pay for future legal fees or whatever the hell it is, it's that he actually can't stop. The way that he behaves is compulsive. He can't not be this guy. His behavior is a result of an actual personality disorder. It's not just that he's a shitty person. He is a shitty person, but it's that he's a shitty person who has a narcissistic personality disorder. It's called disorder for a reason. He cannot prevent himself from doing this because he is a black hole where a person should be. And so if things are not about him, he will make them about him and burn the entire house down so that it can be about him.
And of course, he's able to burn the house down up to this point because he's been wealthy enough and powerful enough to be able to get someone to buy him a new one.
Yeah, well, he's never had any accountability or consequences in his entire life. This is a guy who has credibly been charged with how many counts of sexual assault is it? 19?
Including ones on minors.
Yeah, I mean, and he's never
settled
actually
out of
had
court.
He's never had to face actual consequences in his entire 74 years of existence. And it was infuriating. Like right after the election, there were like people in the GOP saying, well, let's just humor him for a while. What could be wrong with humoring him for a while? And I wanted to just start screaming. The whole reason that the current situation exists is because his entire life has been everybody saying, what would be the harm if we humored him for a while?
The realization that the plans that they've had to try and overturn the election have been slow slipshod. And so Rocky and they're so Rocky and Bullwinkle, as you keep saying, it's because everyone told him he was going to win, and he really genuinely thought he was going to win by a landslide, because everybody just assured him that they would, and they did so because they were cowards.
Yeah. You know, as somebody who, and you know this, has had way too many years growing up of dealing with malignantly narcissistic behavior.
Yeah.
One of the things that malignant narcissists do, and you can see this at every possible moment in the Trump regime, is that they make you believe that saying no to them is worse. It's going to be worse for you than just letting them have what they want. That they were going to make your life so miserable that you get to a point where you would just rather have quiet than justice. And it is just so much easier than giving them what they want and just getting on with your day than it is to have to deal with their nonsense and rage and bullshit, that you give them whatever it is that they want just to make them shut up. And this has been the past 4 years, the past 74 years, you know, however you want to look at it. But at a certain point, you get to a point, I know that I did, where I was like, I do not care. I don't care. Scream if you want to. I don't get, and the problem is that people, they make you afraid of saying no because they make sure that your life gets turned into a living hell for telling them that they can't have something.
Particularly if this person is wealthy and powerful.
Yes.
And a white straight man.
Yes, and this is why you don't give malignant narcissists money. But, oops. But that's kind of it, is that these same people, this could have all been short-circuited if at any point somebody just told him no. Like, just no.
Well, what could it, though? Because he's at the point where anyone who tells him no basically loses their livelihood and their career and everything, right? For example, the head of the cybercrime division, who apparently was one of the very few competent Trump appointees who stuck through, who basically says, and who apparently, by all accounts, has done a good job.
Yeah.
He's actually been a good, competent, solid administrator.
Right.
Basically just went, no, this is the most secure election we've ever had, and this is how we know this. And he gets fired on Twitter. And immediately just goes, yeah, but I did a good job. Which he did.
And so the question kind of just becomes like, and part of the reason that these attempts and these lawsuits have become more and more sad and ridiculous and laughable, like the filings are really bad, Howard. They're really bad. They're like the kind of filings like if your kids made a courtroom show in the backyard, that's what they look like.
Yeah, they're kind of...
Yeah. They're really bad. But the reason...
Yeah, we're being represented by Mr. the Moose and Mr. Flying Squirrel.
Yeah, But part of the reason that that's true is that aside from keeping the base activated and the money income flowing in, they're there to give him a lollipop. They're there to make him shut up. They're completely a show. It's like we were talking. Howard and I were speaking about the Twilight Zone episode with Billy Mummy and.
It's a Good Life, about
thank you.
1955.
Yeah, we were talking about that, and that's
Cornfield.
but the cornfield, and that's exactly what it's like. That they do ridiculous nonsense just to make it so that he doesn't fire everybody.
Yeah.
And the hilarious part is that there is only like 63 days left before the inauguration or something, 63 or 62, something like that.
And how many days before the certification?
Certification will happen in the first week of December. Second week. It's December 14th. It's December 4th. Well, no, the certification is the first week that it's required to be in. I think it's December 3rd or something, 3rd or 4th. I think it's one or the other. And then the electoral vote itself happens on December 14th. The electors vote on December 14th. Once December 14th, like once that hard line passes, this is all nonsense, like real nonsense, because it's really over because the electors will have voted.
Right.
But right now, all of this is just to keep him occupied so that he doesn't just run around screaming and breaking things, because all he does is watch TV all day. So,
which is incidentally one of the things the Lincoln Project achieved, because although the Lincoln Project are clearly terrible people, and some of their videos you look at and you go, what? The one where they compare Trump to Castro, which they also did in Spanish, which they were clearly intending to show to the grandchildren of plantation owners in Florida. They were buying ad time between Fox and Friends in the Washington DC area, so
yes.
They had a target audience of 1.
Yes.
Which is why when the adverts go, "This is about you, Donald," it really is.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with, and actually they're not even all the same problem with various members of the Lincoln Project. Like they're not actually even all the same problem. But I will say that they are absolutely fantastic at this specific thing. Like
annoying Donald Trump,
making him crazy. They are absolutely perfect at it, and that's completely true. So, the what they're just trying to, I mean, aside from the grift and aside from keeping the base, waving little flags and buying hats, it's really there just to make it so that he has his attention is diverted from starting a war with Iran or whatever it is today. That he, as long as he's distracted by the Moose and Squirrel show, this time for sure. And now here's something we hope you'll really like. That I miss June Foray. That at least he's not doing something worse. And so that's kind of like what all this is about. So those are the 2 questions I think we're gonna hit in this section of Cope. So realistically speaking, in talking about coping, so I guess that I should leave it with is that, because I was asked by a friend who lives in Ireland, but German, but lives in Ireland yesterday. And she was asking me, she's like, I'm really starting to get worried. Do you really think he's going to leave? And I'm like, oh, he's going to leave. He's going to leave. He's going to make everybody's life utterly miserable until he does, but he's going to leave. And that all the lawsuits in the world are not going to change this, because every day that this nonsense goes on, state governments have had enough. And it doesn't even matter who's running them. Like, for real, like when you have lost people, like in the state of Georgia, when you've lost Georgia Republicans who are now just like, this is absurd and needs to stop.
It's game over.
It's over. It's really over. So, we hope that you enjoyed. Leave comments or tell us what your questions are that we can cover in the future, and we will certainly consider it. And if you hate it, can you blame James? Because we're going to do that.
We are.
We are,
All right.
really are. All right, we will see you next time. Rocks out.
Bye.